Okay folks, back on Duna and it's time to head home. So first order of business is to get ourselves turned around in the right direction because, as always, an equatorial prograde orbit is the easiest way to take off because you're pretty much adding the planet's own speed to your orbital velocity, so you get a couple hundred meters a second head start. So yeah, we're just about lined up, so we'll just make sure we get the engines on, not those engines. Where is it? That engine. Okay. Now I could take off easily and quickly if I wanted to use the rapiers, and doing so wouldn't be that fuel inefficient because I'd only need them on for a few seconds. But I want to do it with the nuke just to show it can be done. But here's a nice demonstration of just how ridiculously weak the nukes are. I'm still rolling backwards down the hill even though I've got the rocket on full blast. But yeah, we're starting to move now. So, one of the issues with taking off from a place like Duna is, as came up several times in the previous ep, the atmosphere, the thin atmosphere, and the amount of speed required to maintain level flight at a given pitch depends upon atmospheric density. So, what this all comes down to is that takeoff speeds, if gravity was the same, takeoff speeds on Duna would be much higher than they are on Kerbodyne. Fortunately, Duna also has much weaker gravity, which balances things out a bit, but still, you need some air moving pretty quick under your wings to be able to fly properly here. But, Jeb doesn't mind though. Jeb's all happy, as always. How's Anbo doing? Ooh, he knows what's coming. He knows we're about to head back into the air, and his fear of gases or whatever is kicking back in. That's a very depressed looking Kerbal. Anyway though, we're starting to get some speed up, cruising along. This is a bit tricky normally because Duna's so bumpy and has boulders on it. There's one right in front of me. I better do something about that. So let's just swing away there. Ooh, and don't tip over, don't bash the wings. Roll it back, roll it back. Ooh, there we go. And that's just a ground scatter boulder. Probably, I don't think they have a collision mesh anyway, but we'll avoid it for form's sake. So, what was I about to say? Oh yeah, bumpiness. As you can see there, it's a bit bumpy. But this is in that valley that I landed in, so we're still on a relatively flat bit of Duna, but even the flat bits of Duna have some bibs and bobs to deal with, but so you do occasionally need to do a bit of active piloting on the ground. Let's just demo here. Okay, so on Kerbodyne I could take off at that speed, but here, trying it, nope, nose goes up, nose goes down. There's just, the air is too thin, not enough of it, well, the atmosphere is too thin, not enough of it is hitting the underside of our wings to lift us off. So we need a bit more speed. And there's another boulder, but I think we're clear of that one. Yeah, we're all good. Okay, so we've got a bit of air now, but you can see we're stalling. Even though we've got a very small angle of attack, even though we're going at a decent pace, we're still stalling. And we're losing altitude. We're dropping back down again. And again, this is not enough atmosphere hitting our wings. So this is going to be a bit of a bunny hop takeoff, I think. Boom. There we go. But yeah, down again safe. This is also good. Designing your landing gear setup right is important for Duna. You want something with a long and wide enough wheelbase that it's stable, even in challenging conditions. And tail strike guards are a very good idea. So let's see if we can lift the nose again. Okay, again the canards are in a stall, but I think we'll get up this time. Yeah, I think we're good. So yeah, 18 meters, still climbing, about 5 meters a second. Yeah, okay, cool. We're flying now. Yeah, so all that's takeoff on a nuke, one nuke only. So that's a tiny fraction of the thrust this normally operates with on Kerbodyne. But it is possible to do, you just need to have a bit of patience. Climb rate's dropping again, but that's just as I pull the nose down for a second to get it out of the stall. Now that we're out of the stall and up over 100 meters a second, now I can start to climb a bit more seriously. get a bit of ground under me, which I want to do because we're getting towards the edge of the valley, so the ground is rising to meet me somewhat. So a little bit of VTOL thrust from the Vernus here, just to give me a bit of safety margin. And this is another case where Kerbal flight indicators, that little yellow circle on the horizon, with the line and the nose direction marker, come in very handy. When you're in one of those situations of, oh, I'm not sure if I'm going to clear that bit or not, having that little marker to let you know helps. Okay, so we're cruising along a decent pace. We've got about 50 metres clearance on the ground, and Anpo is completely crapping himself. That's an extremely panicked Kerbal, and the contrast. Look at Jebediah. Jeb's having a fine time. And very interested in what's on the dashboard. He doesn't seem to care that much about looking outside. But, presumably there's something down in there. Or maybe they finally put the centipede game into the RPM, like I suggested last time. But no, looks like he's just looking at... hang on. What do we got? Okay, there's Jeb. What's he looking at? So that it could be the view screen, it could be the nav ball. It's a bit hard to tell. I think, and especially it's a Kerbal, so he might have one eye looking at the view screen and the other eye looking at the nav ball. It seems quite likely, actually. But yeah, we're flying along still. And okay, this is going to be this ascent to orbit is going to take a while because we're just using the nuke. So there is going to be a bit of time skipping in this. I'm not going to make you watch the entire ascent to orbit. But it didn't take that long for me either. You can easily crank it up to heavy time acceleration here, which I'm going to do as soon as I'm not in danger of smacking into the ground, which you see we're still less than 100 metres clearance underneath us, even though I've been flying for quite some time now. And just make sure I've got my SAS settings right. Well, the PID tuner. Close enough. And again, see, every time I'm trying to get the nose up, because of the relatively low speed, because of the very thin atmosphere, the canards are stalling out almost instantly. But it doesn't matter. And on Kerbin, you want to gain a fair bit of altitude fairly quickly because you want to get out of the low atmosphere drag. But again, because the atmosphere here is so thin, there's barely any atmospheric drag to speak of anyway. So you're best off using a really shallow ascent. You never want to waste any of your fuel fighting gravity when you can get your wings to do it for you. Okay, aerodynamic lift is a renewable resource. You can spend it and spend it and spend it, and there's still just as much there as there was before. So if you can concentrate your single-use resource, your fuel, into gaining orbital velocity instead of altitude, you'll end up a lot better. And hang on, what's happening here? Ooh, it's getting dark and cloudy. It's good. It's a dust storm on Duna, and a very menacing looking one too. I'm glad we're only running on the nuke rather than jets. That doesn't look like it would be friendly stuff to suck into your intakes. But yeah, there's quite a bit of it back there. Ooh, dramatic. Again, this isn't a stock game feature. This is something you get from an add-on from environmental visual enhancements. But yeah, look at that. Even on the down-facing cameras, where you'd normally be able to expect to see a bit of ground, black, black, black. I think we're stuck in the clouds. But you can see it on the little map there now. See how we're getting out of the edge of the valley, getting over the Chinese highlands, but I've cut forward a bit, so we're 8 kilometres up now and flying into a very large dust storm. That is rather dramatic. Oof. Anyway, but we're still flying happy, so it's all good. So you want to launch in a fairly horizontal manner off Duna. You want to let your wings do the lifting, and you want to concentrate as much as possible on just building up to orbital speed, because an orbit is a speed much more than it is an altitude. If you're at orbital altitude but not moving, you just drop like a rock. Whereas if you're at orbital speed, no matter what altitude you're at, eventually you're going to end up in orbit, unless something slows you down, like atmospheric drag or smacking into a mountainside or something. But we're up. Okay, so time to shut down coaster apoaps as always. I don't think that's the sunrise showing there because the sun's above us, so I'm not sure what that glow is on the horizon just then. Weird mysteries, we'll have to investigate that next time we come back. So, yeah, you see, we're in pretty much a vaguely equatorial prograde orbit. There's a bit of inclination on it, but not enough to really matter. So we'll just get up to apoaps, give a little brief tap on the nuke to circularize, and then we'll be back up and we'll be ready to go. So there we go, chuggy chug. This is on max time acceleration as usual, which is why it's burning relatively quickly. And there's the always disorienting spin around into orbit. There we go. Okay, you can see there's a good transfer window, the blue dot in the middle of that, but that's like a year and a bit away. And so I would have to wait around a year or so to get the most efficient transfer, but you don't have to do that. And I've got fuel to spare, so I can leave right now if I want, which I am doing. There's a penalty of about, I think it was about 700 meters a second or so, but we got out just fine. And I've cut way forward here because you don't need to see all that slow transfer stuff. And now we're coming back into Kerbodyne. Now, if I wanted to do a non-atmospheric, conventional capture and circularize with just thrusters, it would take a couple of thousand meters a second of delta V. It would be very expensive because we're coming in at extreme speed from Interplanetary. So I'm instead going to go for a bit of an aero brake. As you can see here, it's quite a vigorous aero brake. So I'm keeping it a bit, Mach 15, that's quite quick. And that's at 38,000. I think it was doing about I think it was doing 16 or 17 when we first hit the atmosphere. Ooh, and that's getting wobbly too. I've got the nose down here to try and hold me in the atmosphere long enough to slow down, but I have to be very careful doing it, and that's why I've got the RCS on as well, because it's very easy to lose control at Mach 12, and if you do, it's not easy to recover from. And there you can see the nose is pulling down, but even with all that, we're still heading out. I've pulled a lot of speed off. We're now doing Mach 12 and a bit instead of Mach 17 or so. Although okay, you can see the Mach numbers changing up, even though I'm still decelerating just because the altitude is changing and the speed is. But yeah, we're back out of the atmosphere again and needing to use a bit of retro thrust just to get a capture. But the aero brake, it covered most of it for me. But boom, there we go. We're captured. We're in orbit. A very extremely elliptical orbit, but at least we're captured. And now orbit around once more, come back in, re-enter as normal, aero brake again to knock off the last of the speed, fly in over the mountains, and get ready to head down to KSC for a normal landing. Here we come. Alright, so it's down to a speed of a couple hundred meters a second. I've got just enough fuel left in the tanks, as you can see, so I would have run short if I'd tried to get the capture without the aero braking, but I also wanted to make sure that I had enough fuel left to jet around on Kerbodyne once I got back into the atmosphere, although I actually ended up coming down not that far to the southwest of KSC, so it didn't take me very long to fly back in. But just showing off the landing approach here. So about 30 kilometers away, which is actually quite close. So by the time you're getting to this sort of distance to KSC, you want to get... Okay, the secret to any landing is get lined up, low and slow as early as possible. You can leave it later once you get the hang of what you're doing. Woo! Okay, also there, always remember to turn time acceleration off before you do any sharp maneuvers. I nearly pulled my wings off there. But yeah, so you want to get down low, and by low I mean less than 1,000 meters off the ground, and once you're in really close I mean less than, say, 100 meters off the ground. The more shallow your approach, the easier it's going to be. The only difficulty with being very low is it sometimes makes it a bit hard to see if you're perfectly lined up with the runway. This is why you have a flag at the end of the runway that you set as a target. You can see it marked on the nav ball. And this is also why you might do something like this. Just pull your view up a bit. so you can see the runway more easily. This would be easier to see if it was during daytime, but yeah, well, for for me as well as for you, but it's good enough. We'll be able to see the runway in a little bit, and come on in. So it's all about washing off, a fair bit of speed beforehand. I don't have to worry too much with this one because it's got the air brakes and things, so I can cut speed fairly rapidly the last minute if I want to. But usually best off like getting your speed down as low as you can well before you get there, and then just putting a little bit of throttle back on your jets just to hold that speed constant so you don't just fall out of the sky. But that is pretty much the speed you want to be off at for landing. Fall out of the sky speed, plus 1 meter a second. You want to be right on the edge of stall. For a perfect, make it as easy as possible landing. But again, all of these rules I'm giving you for landing are things that you can ignore once you really know what you're doing. But this is the way to learn how to do it. And a lot of people, even good experienced Kerbal pilots, have a lot of trouble with landing aircraft. But like anything else in Kerbal, it's really tricky until you figure out how to do it, and then it's not that tricky at all. So yeah, just get, like I was saying, lined up, low and slow. The lined up is important too, because you don't want to have to do too much in the way of sharp maneuvers at the last second, although that's about to be a do as I say, not as I do thing, because I think I do some little wiggles here just as we're coming in. Here we go, just zapping about a bit. And this is another reason why the Kerbal flight indicators are good, that little yellow ball. You can just even if you don't plan on using it permanently, put that mod in for a second, take a plane up and just mess about, use some rudder, use some bank, and see what it does to your prograde vector, to that little yellow ball. You'll get an idea of how fast you start to turn around if you just bank but don't actually pull up. You'll get a much better idea of what rudder inputs actually do when you're flying. So you can see we're getting down to below 200 meters below 200 meters of altitude, which you want to do from here, and down at not that far off my takeoff speed. Could even be going a little slower, but this will do. And yeah, just I keep getting paranoid about my PID tuner going a bit wobbly, and there is one mild glitch in that pilot assistant PID tuner, in that it sometimes reverses a few of the values you've put in, like swaps it from pitch to yaw or whatever. So that was just me correcting then, because I was noticing the nose was pitching a bit. But there we're good. So I'm a little bit off to the right, so I've just banked and ruddered around there. And you also notice I'm not pointing directly at the end of the runway here. I want to get around in line before I get to the runway, because I want to be able to straighten out again early enough that I'm not trying to do it at the same time as I'm actually landing. So we'll just cruise over here towards the is that north? Yeah, towards the north for a bit. But we're about to be lined up. Nearly there, nearly there. Because it's going to take a little bit of time to turn the nose as well, you also need to start to straighten out just a little bit before you get in line, because otherwise by the time you get straightened out you will no longer be in line. So there we go, put a bit of bank on. I see I've got a little bit of throttle on here too, because speed's getting low enough that I'm in danger of starting to drop altitude faster than I'd like to. And also I'm just a bit impatient if I want to get there, but there we are. So we're getting perfectly lined up. Flatten out again. You also you want your wings level before you come into land, because again, just landing is tricky enough already. You don't have to. You want to remove all the distractions and extraneous factors. You don't want to have to do anything apart from landing at the time you're landing. Which I haven't quite got right here. I turned back in a bit too soon, so I'm going to have to zig back the other way. So there we go. There. Now heading up, but now we're going to be too high. So straighten out again, and as I straighten out, rudder, pull the nose down hard. Okay, we're about to slam into the hangar, so just a little bit more turn, and now we're going down way too fast, but again, that's a bit deliberate. I want to ditch some altitude. Ooh, this again. I land much more tidily when I'm not recording it on video. I seem to have a tendency to do bad landings when people are watching me. Um, but yeah, so just plant that little yellow circle on the end of the runway, come in shallow, tiny bit of flare at the last minute, air brakes out to slow me down, and boom. There we go. All down safe. And good. Just need to brake, steer a little bit to keep us pointing in the right direction. And slow down, slow down. And what the hell was that? A piece of my wing just fell off for absolutely no reason. That was very, very strange. As far as I know, that dust storm on Duna was purely a cosmetic effect, but this is starting to make me think maybe it wasn't. But anyway, don't need those wings now anymore, so it doesn't really matter. And it'll give the maintenance guys something to do. But there we are, back from Duna, all safe. A relatively small space plane can go interplanetary, land, do stuff, come back up, get back home. You do not need these gigantic monster ships. Nothing wrong with them. If you like them, go for it, but there is another way. Anyway, we're done with that, so see you around, guys.